Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Ohio Huntsman Podcast with your hosts Jason,
Jacob,
and Jeff.
And this week we're going to talk about new hunters or getting into hunting. One of the questions we get asked all the time is, how do I get into hunting? How do I get started? Where do I start? And so we're going to cover that today. If you're a seasoned hunter, there might not be a ton in here because we want to keep it basic for people. We don't want to overwhelm somebody that is truly a new hunter. But you could also listen and then use this as a resource for anybody you know that is looking to get into hunting, has questions about it. We're hoping to provide a lot of good information for a new hunter in this episode. So a good place to start, actually, we were doing some research for this, and the ODNR actually has a pretty good link on their site. We'll put the link in the show notes, but it's Hunting for Beginners, and they go through a lot of information on the hunter safety course, some of the mentorship programs, some of the courses that they offer, knowing your equipment, safety, the cooking aspect of it, which is a big one. A lot of people that are getting into hunting as adults are getting into it because of the clean eating and the really high quality food that you can get from hunting. So they've got recipe resources on there. So like I said, we'll link to that. I would say the best way to get into hunting, and this one is kind of hard, is if you have a mentor, right? We all grew up hunting with our dad, hunting with the guys at the cabin. They all mentored us as young hunters. I would venture to guess that in your network or extended network of people, you know a hunter. It's an uncle, it's somebody at work, it's, a friend of a friend, that if you genuinely want to learn how to hunt and you said, hey, can you ask your buddy if he can show me some things or take me out? I would imagine that they'd be happy to help. Most hunters that I know are good people. They want to help. They like hunting. They like sharing the hunt. I know if somebody at work or something came up to me and said, hey man, I've heard you hunt, would you be interested, could you show me some things? I'd be happy to. I'd take them out. I'd, teach them what I can. And I would venture to guess that most hunters would be that way. I'd like to think that most hunters would be that way, that they would like to help, show you the ropes, teach you. If you don't have a mentor, if you can't find a mentor, basically the place you have to start, or the place we're going to recommend you start, is the hunter safety course. You have to have taken the hunter safety course to buy a hunting license. There is an apprentice hunting license, which allows you to sort of circumvent the hunter safety course, but you have to be with a mentor or somebody that's a licensed hunter. So if you can't find a mentor to teach you, then you probably can't find a mentor to take you out hunting. So the place you really need to start is the hunter safety course. And there again, the ODNR, that's where you're going to find your information on that. We've done some research here on the course and the different types of course, and I think Jeff's going to talk about that. So Jeff, do you want to talk about the hunter safety course?
Yeah. When it comes to hunter's education, there's currently 3 options. The first option is an in-person hunter safety course provided by the ODNR. It'll either be an ODNR employee or a registered hunter safety course instructor, someone who is taken coursework to become an instructor.
Right, they're certified volunteers, basically, right?
Yes, yep. And this option is completely free. You can go to the ODNR's website and find a course that you can sign up for on there. They have courses all over the state. This course is 8 to 12 hours long. When I took it, it was split up over 2 days. There was the main course day where you learned everything. And then there was another day that you basically had a recap of what you went over the previous day, and then you took the test. At the end of the course, you take a test. It's 100 questions long. You need to score 75%.
And they talk about like for example, firearm safety, but there's no shooting part of the course, right? It's just classroom stuff. You're not going onto a range and shooting a gun or a bow or anything, right?
Correct. There's no shooting portion. A lot of times they will bring in bows, sometimes firearms to just show you, go over the parts. With the in-person one, they talk about Ohio-specific laws, and they talk about a lot more specific things to Ohio. With the other options there are, sometimes that's a little bit more absent with specific Ohio information. And also the in-person one focuses a lot more on safety, from my experience, compared to the online options.
Okay.
My wife took the online options, the completely online one, which I'll get into in a second. And there was a little bit less about safety compared to when I and the people I know took the in-person hunter safety course.
So one thing, and like it's been a long time since I've taken hunter safety, but I would bet that the one thing that you get from the in-person instruction is you can ask very specific, detailed questions, and the instructor is there to answer those questions. Whereas if you're doing the online options, you don't really have somebody to ask questions of, right? You just go through the material, take the quizzes at the end of each unit, and then you take the final test.
Correct.
So if you, I guess where I'm going with that is, if you have the option and your schedule allows and there's one near you, I would tend to steer people toward the in-person instruction versus the online options.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. It's just, I think you're going to get a better experience. You're going to get more information, and the instructor can kind of tailor the information to the type of questions that are being asked. So before we keep going, the three types are the in-person instructor that we just talked about. You have the home study course, and then you have the online hunter education. And those two have some aspect of online, but they're a little different. Like the home study is like the between the in-person instruction and the online.
Correct.
Why don't you give the rest of the details on the other two, since we've covered the in-person instruction?
Yeah. The home study one is a 4-hour online course, and that's an estimated time. Depends on how quick of a read you are, how well you are comprehending the information. But they estimate that it's 4 hours in person, and then a 2 to 4 hour class and time to take the test. The home study course costs $15, and that money goes to the vendor that provides the online coursework. The ODNR does not get that money.
And that's an important distinction. The in-person course is free. Both of the online and home study cost $15.
Yeah. And I said it was 4 hours of online, but you can also stop and pick up whenever you want. You know, your work is saved.
That's one of the nice benefits of it, is that it's more flexible for your schedule, right? You're not sitting in a classroom for 8 to 12 hours. You can start and stop.
Correct. Yep. And at the end of the home study one, you take the exact same test as the people who did the in-person one and have to score the exact same 75%.
Do you know, are you going to an existing in-person test, or like because I guess to summarize, right, the home study is online learning. You learn, you go through the units, you take the quiz at the end of each unit, and you take a test, and then you've got to take a voucher saying you've passed the home study to then go take an in-person final exam.
Correct.
And it's the same 100-question test that you would take for the in-person, and you've got to score the same 75% or better. Are you going to a instructor-led course to take that, or is it, how do you set that up?
It's a separate course for the people who have done the home study.
Okay.
Because they do a little bit of instructor-led stuff first and then go into the final test. So it is a separate course. There's separate locations that you have to, and times that you have to.
Separate scheduling. It's not like
Right.
you're just going to go in whenever. There's a
Correct. Yeah,
time when
yes.
they're offering this last portion of the home study and the final exam.
Correct.
Right.
And you
And
can find that.
my understanding is those fill up pretty quick too. I don't know that for sure, but from the I had a buddy that looked into it, and he had trouble scheduling the testing portion because most people tend to lean towards that option, I think, where they do, it's kind of a blend between the two. So it was, they don't, he lives down in like the Columbus area, so it's probably not quite as big of a hunting, because it's more metropolitan. But he was having trouble finding a location to go do the test at or get into a class, quote unquote, for the home study course. It was like he was going to have to wait till like the following year to get into it because they only offer it so many times throughout the year, and I think they fill up pretty quick.
Yeah. And you can find where to take both the in-person hunter safety course and if you do the home study option, where to take the final test at on the ODNR website. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah. All of the links that we talk about today, all the resources we talk about today, we'll be sure to have those in the show notes for you guys. Jeff, one question for you. Is there a time period from the time you finish the home study to the time you have to take the final exam?
I'm not positive on that, but I believe there is not a time period.
Okay. As long as you have that voucher saying you passed the home study portion, you can then go take the final exam, that last part of in-course instruction and the final exam.
Correct.
Okay.
The final option is the online course. It's 100% online. You have to be 12 years or older to use this option. Anyone under 12 years either has to do the in-person option or the home study option. With the 100% online one, you will have to take a quiz at the end of every chapter and pass, and then you will take a final test. This one, my wife took 2 years ago when it was a relatively new option, and I found that it had almost zero Ohio-specific information. So it won't
regarding
tell
laws
you,
and stuff?
Yeah, regarding laws, and sometimes even kind of led you astray with some laws because it talks about things that either are 100% legal and talks about how you can't do it, or talks about things that are illegal in Ohio as hunting options. So there was one point where it kind of led you astray. The other thing with this home one is that it's a lot more hunter's education as opposed to hunter's safety.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot less information about safety and a lot more information about educating hunters on firearms and hunting equipment and conservation. There was a lot more about conservation, and you needed to know specific dates for things that had happened in conservation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was a lot more of a hunter's education course that have educated hunters compared to safe hunters.
I wonder if that's been, because you said that's kind of 2 years old at this point, right? I wonder if that's, I'm kind of hoping that at least the Ohio specific stuff where there's contradictions, like I'm hoping that that's been fixed, updated since then. If anybody out there has taken the online course recently and knows that that's been changed, shoot us a note. I'd like to know. Maybe we could reach out to somebody from the ODNR and have them on the show and just to talk about
and
the online options or the hunter safety.
Yeah, you can reach out to the vendor for the online course as well with questions. So that's also an option if you are a little confused about something. There is an option to reach out to someone from the vendor. How good that service is, I don't know. My wife did not try it.
Right.
With the 100% online course, I would really only recommend this for adults who at least have some sort of knowledge about hunting already. Maybe someone who has had an apprentice license for a few years, because it is lacking in a lot of the safety aspect of things. So I really wouldn't recommend it for, someone who is a child, someone who's older than 12, but not, 18. I wouldn't recommend it for that age frame, because first off, I think it would be kind of difficult for someone in that age range to take this course, because there was a lot of very specific information about gun parts and dates of things, and it won't give them the safety aspect of hunter safety.
Right, okay. Well, that's good to know then. One thing I wrote down here in my notes is the different units that are in the, I think, like the study guide or the different modules in the online. So I was just going to read through those real quick just to kind of give you an idea of the type of topics that are covered. So Unit 1, they've got Introduction to Hunter Education. Unit 2 is Know Your Firearm Equipment. Unit 3, Basic Shooting Skills. Unit 4, Basic Hunting Skills. Unit 5, Know Your Muzzleloader Equipment. Unit 6, Know Your Bow Hunting Equipment. Unit 7 is Be a Safe Hunter. Unit 8 is Hunting from Elevated Stands. Unit 9 is Be a Responsible and Ethical Hunter. Unit 10, Preparation and Survival Skills. And Unit 11 is Understanding Wildlife. And one thing that on the Unit 9, Be a Responsible and Ethical Hunter, that reminded me of a Aldo Leopold quote. And it says, ethical behavior is doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when doing the wrong thing is legal. I just think that's really fitting. I think it's really important to remember as us as hunters, we're typically doing our activity alone. You're out in the woods by yourself. It's easy to kind of bend the law, but we kind of need to hold ourselves to a higher standard and just be ethical and most importantly, be safe. So that's a big takeaway, I think, that I'd like to make sure people get from this. So that being said, we've got some, before we get into that, some of the units in there were Know Your Firearm, Know Your Bow, Know Your Muzzleloader. I wanted to get your guys' opinion on where you think people should start. And I guess, let me back up. Are we looking at this as getting into deer hunting, or are we looking at this as getting into hunting?
I was thinking that this was getting into hunting because...
Just general.
Yeah, not every person might be interested in deer hunting. And also, getting into deer hunting, for me, in my opinion, that's going straight from never playing the game before to the major leagues.
Right. I'm glad you said that, because I'm on board with you. We all started off hunting small game, rabbits, squirrels, and I think there's not as much of it done these days. Everybody wants to jump into shooting big giant bucks, and I think you miss out on a lot of the things learned in the squirrel woods, or walking around with a shotgun trying to shoot rabbits. And I guess what I'm saying is I would recommend starting with small game if you can. Get a 22 and go shoot squirrels, or go, get a 20 gauge or something and shoot squirrels. And that's a great way to get started. People will be more willing to let you on their property. If you ask, hey, could I walk your woodlot and see if I could shoot a couple squirrels? I would venture to guess you'll get a lot more yeses asking that than, hey, I was wondering if I could go back there and try and shoot a big giant buck. Like,
It's also a lot easier to find good places to hunt small game on public land.
Yeah, very true.
Than it is to find a good place to hunt deer on public land. You can go to just about any public land and go out and hunt squirrel or rabbit and be successful.
Be successful, yeah. Without too much, you don't have to go 3 miles back in. You can pretty much come off the parking area for the most part and get up into the woods and sit still for a little bit and you'll start to see squirrels moving around,
Right.
Find some nut trees and you're in the money. So that then takes me back to the question I had for you guys. Do you think, and I guess this would be more deer hunting specific. So let's say you're either jumping right into deer hunting. We're not talking about jumping right into shooting big giant bucks. You just want to get into deer hunting. You want to shoot a deer, or you've done some small game hunting and now you want to get into deer hunting. Do you think people should start with a bow, or do you think they should start with a gun?
I personally think gun. I'm a firearm starting opinion here. For two reasons. One, I'm assuming or hoping that you start with small game, which 99.9% of that is done with a firearm of some sort.
Yeah.
So you'll be familiar with a firearm. So that's one reason I lean that way. But the primary reason I lean that way is just efficacy. Not that today's modern bows, crossbows, aren't efficient, but you can have much worse marksmanship with a firearm and still have success than with a bow.
Right.
So that's my primary reason. I mean, just every year on, the social media sites, you see people, person after person, wounding deer, and these aren't new hunters.
With a bow.
With a bow.
Yeah.
You
can also wound a deer with a gun.
Right.
But...
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about shot placement, which you'll learn in your hunter safety course, but it's much more likely to wound a deer with a bow, especially if you're an inexperienced hunter with your first interaction with the species you're hunting, because obviously you're going to be all amped up. Your heart's going to be beating 100 miles an hour. It's even experienced hunters make mistakes and wound animals, but I feel like a gun gives you more leeway for a quote unquote bad shot and still having a positive result.
Yeah,
because a bow.
I would second that. I would say start with a gun, because you can even have a good shot on a deer with a bow, and if you don't have somebody that's an experienced tracker or has tracked deer before, like if you shoot high in the lungs, you might not have a ton of blood to follow.
Right.
That's a dead deer.
Right.
You double lunged him, but if it's high lung,
right, its lungs are going to fill up with the blood and it's not going to pour out.
Right.
Yeah.
That could be a hard deer to find. It was a good, ethical killing shot, but it might just be a hard deer to find. And I would just hate for somebody's first experience shooting a deer to be a bad memory, because
right. Wounding a
wounded
deer. And wounding a deer is it happens to everyone, but it's a gut-wrenching, upsetting
horrible
experience.
Yeah.
Right. And I would never want that to be someone's first experience with deer hunting.
Right. I could easily see that turning somebody off of it. They shoot a deer in the guts and it goes for miles, and it's like, I can't believe I just did that to a living, breathing thing. I don't think I want to do this again.
Right.
Also, if you put a bad shot, a spine shot on a deer with a bow and, do drop it, it's going to need a follow-up shot, and it's a lot less gruesome if you're doing a follow-up shot with a gun than it is with a bow.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do it with a gun than a bow, and it's a pretty horrifying experience when you do have to do a follow-up shot, especially for a new hunter.
Yeah.
And it's much easier with a gun than it is with a bow.
Yeah, and kind of along those same lines too with a gun. Not that it's not an intimate experience, but bow hunting is much more intimate.
Right.
You're much closer to the animal. You can see and hear a lot more when you're bow hunting. So I feel like if it's your first time killing a big game animal, it may be better to do it from a distance so you don't have to necessarily hear the groans and moans and whatever may happen when you shoot it.
Right.
I just, part of the game. I mean, when you kill an animal, it doesn't feel good, obviously.
Right.
So there's noises and whatever. So I feel like with a gun, that kind of removes you a little bit from that. especially for your first kill. The only reason that I would possibly play devil's advocate with a bow is just opportunity. There's much more opportunity with a bow, much longer season. So if you're someone who can't hunt with a firearm because of the timing of the seasons or whatever, and your only option would be to hunt during bow season, then obviously I recommend hunting. I mean,
Right.
I think everyone should get into it. I'm passionate about it and I love doing it. But if you have an option, I would recommend one of the firearm seasons. Ideally, I would say probably the standard week-long shotgun season, which now is not only shotgun. Obviously, you can use certain rifle cartridges, but that would be my first choice, followed by muzzleloader, and then bow hunting would probably be my...
I would recommend, up until this year, if you have, with the new public land laws, but I would have recommended muzzleloader first. If you have private property that you can hunt, I would recommend muzzleloader first, just for the fact that there's less hunting activity in the woods, so it's a little bit more inviting for a first-time hunter. Gun season, typically there's a lot more people, and it's hard to find a place where you're not sitting right on someone, right next to someone, especially if you're hunting public land. So I would recommend muzzleloader just because it's a little less crowded, and you can kind of go out there and learn without there being a lot of other people around pushing you out of your spot.
Yeah.
The only downside with that is if recent history plays into it, it's freezing cold during muzzleloader season.
Yeah, it's been pretty terrible the past couple
That's
muzzleloader
true.
seasons.
When they had the early doe-only muzzleloader season, that would have been a good option as well.
One argument with muzzleloader is there's a higher barrier to entry on learning to shoot a muzzleloader, right?
Right.
If you dump a double powder charge in there or something, you're not thinking, right? There's
Right.
things that you can do.
Well, it's one of those things. Some people say it's safer because it's single shot,
Right.
versus someone who can shoot, 3 different in short succession shots. But there's a lot of things that if you don't know what you're doing, you're messing with black powder, which is by nature explosive.
Right.
Not that, your bullets that you're shooting out of your regular firearms obviously have a exploding propellant in them also. But
Yeah.
it's all contained within a casing. So, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely, I'd say I would agree with you. It's probably a bigger barrier to entry, but it's a cool thing to do, though, too. It's I don't know. I like muzzleloading. It kind of brings you back to, like, the old days, so to speak.
Yeah.
How your grandpa hunted or whatever, I don't know.
I think I would maybe summarize all of this with do what is easiest for you. If you've got somebody that has a muzzleloader but they don't have a shotgun or something and they're willing to let you borrow it, then start with a muzzleloader. If it, whatever is going to get you in the woods basically is and allow you to enjoy it. This should all be enjoyable.
One thing I also want to add is whatever implement that you decide to hunt with when you're learning the deer hunt, first deer hunting, take the time to practice with it. Whether it's a gun, a muzzleloader, a crossbow, a compound bow, take the time to practice.
Yep.
Because the time to learn, how it functions is not when there's a deer standing in front of you.
Yep.
You need to practice beforehand.
Right, yeah, and that's just doing the wildlife a service. You can't, it's not ethical to go out in the woods with a tool, so to speak, that you don't know how to use. You're trying, in reality, you're fully intending on taking an animal's life. So it's just out of respect for the animal, you need to understand the tool you're using and how to use it effectively so you can have the cleanest ethical kill possible.
Yeah. And one of the beautiful things about today's day and age with technology and YouTube and stuff is if you have any questions about how your gun works or how to take this apart or what happens if this jams, like there's so much good free information available online. There's also bad information available online, but you can typically weed through the good from the bad, and it makes it easier to get questions answered. The other thing is, if you went to a gun shop to buy your gun, take it back there and ask them questions, or ask them questions before you leave. They'll be happy, or should be happy, to answer any questions you have about your gun and how it works, or how to get it sighted in, that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I would agree. Take the time to learn, know where your shots are going to go before you go out in the woods and try to shoot an animal. I would say the other benefit of starting with a firearm is it's a shorter season, but I think you have to worry about less. So I think for a newbie, I think your opportunity or your chances for success are potentially higher, in that you don't need to be so stringent about scent and which way the wind's blowing. I mean, when we were kids, we never even talked about which way the wind was blowing. We just went and sat in the woods because it looked like there was some deer sign around here, and hoped a deer walked by. And so much today you hear stuff on like how to get into hunting, and it's somebody that's a seasoned expert hunter talking to people about how to be a seasoned expert hunter. And I would bet that's not where they started, right? They just went in the woods and they followed grandpa out to the stand, or they went with their dad or their uncle or something. And, you just went and sat in the woods. We've talked on here before. We grew up hunting from the ground. We never hunted out of tree stands as kids or anything like that. You just went out and sat in front of a tree,
right,
or next to a tree, and
try to find a tree that's wider than you are.
Right. And try to find some deer sign, a deer trail, or some deer droppings, or some scrapes or rubs or something. And yeah, it looks like there's some tracks here. I'm going to sit here. And I think that there's so much detail and nuance and intricacies that you can get into in hunting. We all love to talk about it and strategize on wind and how should I approach, but a lot of that is just noise when it comes to a new hunter. A lot of that is if you're trying to hunt mature bucks, if you're just looking to go shoot a deer, just go sit in the woods and have fun. If you don't see a deer, no big deal. You had fun sitting in the woods watching the squirrels, or
Well, and you have to take the mindset too. I mean, anytime you're in the woods, you're learning something.
Right.
So if you go sit in the woods and you don't see a deer, at least you learned something. The deer aren't where you were.
Right.
Let's figure out why.
Right. Or they're at least not in this spot at this time of year.
Right. So we need to figure out, where are they now? So it's not wasted. So many times people go sit and they're like, oh, I wasted my day. I didn't see anything. It's like, well, you didn't waste your day.
Right.
I mean, if you just take a step back and think about it, your day wasn't wasted. You realized, the deer aren't here right now, and now I need to figure out why and where they are. So, I mean,
I never count a sit in the woods as a wasted day, man. It's just like, at this point, it's like meditation for me sometimes, man. You just go out there and sit quiet in the woods, man. It's just good for the soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if I don't see anything, at least I got to get away from the noise.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too. People always say, oh, I didn't see anything. And it's like, well, you weren't looking then, because there's plenty to see in the woods. You saw plenty. You just didn't see any deer.
Right.
Yeah. I guarantee you saw plenty. And if you just watch, I mean, you can even watch other wildlife, and it'll teach you about what deer are doing. I mean, when I've been bow hunting before, and just by how the squirrels are acting, if a deer's coming. I've seen squirrels respond because they start getting all jittery and barking, and you're like, oh, these darn squirrels, shut up. And then before you know it, they go silent and a deer comes walking by.
Right.
So it's just, until you've experienced that, you don't really know that maybe by those squirrels causing a racket, they know something's coming or sense something. And that could be a deer. It could be another hunter. It could be a coyote. It could be a lot of things, but...
Yeah, that's a good tip for new hunters. If a squirrel's barking and it's not barking at you, it's barking for a reason, and you should try to figure out what it's barking for, because a lot of times it's something that would be of interest to you. It's either another hunter, it's a deer, it's a coyote, sometimes it's just another squirrel.
Right.
But a lot of times, if a squirrel's barking, it's not barking at you, you should try to figure out what it is barking at.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of transition from the tips thing, there are some good resources for new hunters. And one of those that we wanted to kind of point out is Steve Rinella's book. He's got a 2-volume series. It's called The Complete Guide to Hunting, Butchering. Let me just start over on that. The Complete Guide to Hunting, Butchering, and Cooking Wild Game. And so Volume 1, like I said, it's 2 volumes. Volume 1 is big game. Volume 2 is small game. And really, there's a lot of great info. If you're looking for a book resource like that you can flip through, tons of good information in there about everything, really. Yeah. I mean, it really is a complete guide as far as clothing, type of firearms, basic firearm parts and function, and just all kinds of information in there.
And another good thing with that book is if you're one of those people that want to start with deer because you don't want to eat small game or you don't think small game's interesting, give the small game one a read before you make a final decision on that, because they have a lot of good recipes in there and it really makes small game hunting interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I own both volumes. I've read both pretty much cover to cover. It's like you said, it's a phenomenal book to get a complete start to finish. It goes into enough detail to keep you interested and teach. I mean, anyone that reads that book will learn something. But it's not so detailed and fine-tuned that a new hunter would open it and be like, I don't have a clue what this is talking about.
Right. You're not going to go cross-eyed because it's way in the weeds. But.
Right. I mean, he did a great job of putting it together. I mean, in their large volumes, I don't know the exact page count on them, but I think they're in the 400, 500 page. Both volumes they're very in-depth and complete. They go species by species, and then like Jeff mentioned, there's recipes in there, and I would highly recommend, I'm not even new hunters, I'd highly recommend any hunter who's interested in learning about hunting a different species or even wants to learn more about hunting their own species or want recipes. I mean, I'd recommend everyone buy. They're not super expensive.
Yeah.
For how large and complete they are, they're actually very cheap.
Yeah. We'll have links to those books in the show notes, and they I guess I would just second what Jacob is saying. You know, it's a great book. It's a great resource. The one thing I really like about them is they put tons of pictures in there, whether it's photographs or illustrated pictures. They've got tons of pictures, and with this type of stuff, picture goes a long way to help you understand what, you know, you could write words to convey the information, but it would just take so much describing, whereas a picture, you can just see it then, and there's lots of pictures in these books. That takes us into, I don't think today we're going to get into a ton of strategy. Well, I guess we can talk a little bit about like just finding a spot in the woods. It's going to be high level because, like we said, we don't want to inundate people with like, oh, you need to be on the downwind side of a bedding area, you know, because a new hunter's like, what's a bedding area? What's downwind?
Right. Do I need to be downwind of my bed? What are you talking about?
Right. It just confuses everything. And so I think basically there's public land in Ohio where the ODNR again is a good resource for finding the public land where anybody's allowed to go hunt. Public land's great. We hunt public land. Anybody can use it. Downfall of public land is anybody can use it, so sometimes it's crowded. There's other hunters there wanting to use the resource. They have just as much right to be there as you do, and you have just as much right to be there as they do. New hunter, experienced hunter, non-hunter.
Right.
Everybody's allowed to be there. So anybody that gets all uppity because you're in their spot on public land, they're in your spot. it's everybody's spot.
Right.
So sometimes everybody just needs to just
calm down a little bit.
Just chill out a little bit,
Yeah.
man. We're all just having fun.
Right.
We're all out hunting, or we're all out enjoying the outdoors.
Right.
Just take
I mean,
a deep
if you're
breath.
walking in on public land and you see another hunter already in a spot, obviously respect them, respect their spot.
Right.
But that's if you get there tomorrow earlier than them, that's your spot.
Yeah, and
You know what I mean? Like it's anything.
I don't think we're condoning that per
Right.
se. Is like, oh, I know this
Right.
guy's hunting over here. I'm going to try and steal his spot. That's not
right.
it.
That's not the point. But right. I mean, you have just as much right to that tree as he does, so to speak. But if he's already in it and you know that he hunts there, out of respect, go find your own spot.
Right. It kind of goes back to like the ethics, right? There's no law that says, oh, that guy's hunting there, so I can't hunt there. But it's just kind of like an unwritten code of conduct, if you will. Like, I don't want somebody setting up on the tree right next to me, so I'm not going to set up on the tree right next to somebody else. You know, like, oh, he was there first, I'm going to go find another spot. But public land may be a good place. If you know somebody that owns some land, that's another good opportunity to get out there. And just high level, if you're small, all animals are going to have different habitat, right? And we said we weren't going to limit this to specifically deer, but maybe just look in that complete guide to hunting, cooking. They talk about different habitats for different animals. White-tailed deer, you know, they're sort of famously known as creatures of the edge. They want edge habitat, so where the habitat transitions from crop to woods or overgrown field to a hardwood stand, those edges, even within the woods, right? If you're in kind of open timber and you get into a thicker, brushier section, you could almost guarantee that there's a deer trail running along that edge, right? That's what you're looking for with deer. Squirrel, you're looking for nut trees. Rabbits, you're looking for brushy, kind of overgrown areas where they can get in and hide. There's tons of online resources. The ODNR can help you with that kind of stuff. We can't cover all of that on this episode. And like I said, we want to keep this super high level as to not overwhelm a new hunter. It should be fun. As a new hunter, just go out and experience it and learn. And if it didn't work, then try something else next time. But like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, one of the reasons that a lot of adult hunters or adults are getting into hunting is for the food aspect. And so we definitely wanted to talk about food, recipes. Wild game, wild meat is a great source of good, clean meat. I know we all eat a lot of wild game in our houses, and you hear a lot of, you'll hear people, it's gamey, or it's gross, I don't really like to eat it. And I would argue that they're either handling it wrong in the field or they're just not cooking it right, because I love wild game, man. It's good stuff.
And a lot has, which I think you're going to get into this more, but a lot has changed in the world of wild game cooking in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Because there's some big name, famous chefs that have put out some real quality stuff that can teach the layman, so to speak, how to make some pretty incredible dishes out of their harvest versus just your typical deer stew, that everybody's grandpa made.
Yep.
Yeah, Gordon Ramsay actually really enjoys to cook with wild game.
Really?
So, yeah, if you ever are looking for a recipe, try searching that on the internet, because he actually has a short, I don't think there's a whole lot of episodes, but a hunting series where it's Field to Fork.
Oh, okay. So, again, the ODNR has some links to a couple different resources for this. They actually have some of their own videos that they've put together. When I was looking at them today, some of them look pretty dated. They're old cooking videos, but the recipes are still good. It's just the videos are kind of, they look like they're from the 80s or something, or maybe early 90s, but that's not to say that the recipes aren't good.
Another good tip for someone who's learning to cook with game meat, wild game, is don't try to compare it to something else. Like venison's like beef, so I'm going to try to cook it like beef.
That's a good tip.
Venison's not beef. It's different. Get a recipe for venison and follow it.
Yes.
Right. Same thing with wild turkey and domestic. Wild turkey's not a butterball.
No.
If you
No.
try to cook a wild turkey like a butterball, chances are it's not going to be very good.
You're going to be
it might
disappointed.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a wild turkey is not a butterball. So don't try to compare it to something that you already know and cook it like that.
Right. The biggest
Right.
difference that you'll find is just how lean most wild game is. Now there are, when you get into, and I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of duck or goose experience, but you hear about, the fat in ducks and things like that. And I just can't speak to that real well. But with deer, turkey, that kind of thing, like, it's just lean meat, which makes it good, healthy meat, but it cooks very differently than a beef steak or something that's
Right.
marbled with fat. Like,
Right.
deer meat just doesn't get marbled with fat like
Right,
that.
right. And like Jeff said too, it's not only be careful substituting, venison in for beef necessarily. I mean, it substitutes very well. You just need to know how to cook venison versus beef. It's different. But the thing that I also want to say in terms of the comparison, like a venison steak will never taste like a beef steak.
Right.
That's not saying one is better than the other, but if you're in the mood for a steak, a traditional steak, which would be a beef steak, you're not going to get that from a venison steak. You're just
Right.
not. So if you want a beef steak, eat a beef steak.
Right.
Don't try to eat a venison steak and, it cure your beef steak itch. It's just not going to work.
Right. So with that being said, some of the resources that we'd probably steer you guys to, there's two good ones that I have. The Steve Rinella's book, The Complete Guide to Hunting, Butchering, and Cooking Wild Game, like we mentioned, they've got good recipes in there. Another resource it's called Modern Carnivore. And so you can go to Modern Carnivore, I guess it's just moderncarn.com. And like I said, we'll have links to all this in the show notes, so you don't have to remember the URL. You just look in the show notes. But they've got recipes on there. One, when I was on the website today, one that they had on there that I really want to try this year, especially with you and your Squirrel Grand Slam. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to the goals episode. Is they had buffalo style squirrel legs on there. And the picture they had, like, this stuff looked top notch, man. And I was like, man, that sounds good.
Buffalo anything is good, so
Well,
it's got to be
true.
good.
But it just, like, thinking about squirrel meat, like, it just
Right.
it just lends itself perfectly to that. Like,
Right.
my mouth starts watering when I think about that. And,
Yeah, I don't know why I never thought about that. Like,
Yeah.
because now that you mention it, it's like, oh yeah, it's perfect for that.
Right. And so that recipe's on Modern Carnivore's website.
And the other thing I've kind of found when I've searched through these recipes is it causes me to use more of the animal,
Yeah.
because you look in these recipes and they're calling for, a piece of the deer, so to speak. We'll use the deer. It's probably the most common, a part of the deer that it's like, oh, I've been throwing that away for years.
Yeah.
Something where it's like, some of them get a little exotic,
Yeah.
tongues and different things, stomach. I've seen some where you take the stomach and rinse it out and then use it as like a casing, and some of that's a little exotic unless you're experienced with cooking and know what you're doing. But it's just interesting to see like all the different parts of the deer that you actually can eat and
Yeah.
use. And when you start looking through some of these recipes, you can kind of see like, I've been throwing away a lot of good food.
Yeah. Well, that's where, I guess, going back to the goals episode, trying deer heart, that's my next cooking resource is Hank Shaw. That's where trying deer heart came from, was I read about it in there. Before we get there, one last thing I want to touch on Modern Carnivore is they are doing, new this year, they're doing a 6-part series where they're basically sort of doing this. They're following 3 new hunters as they kind of take the journey into hunting, and it's a video series. So we'll link to that video series, but I didn't get a chance to watch any of them before this, but it looks like it's going to be a cool series to watch and follow along. So they're that's probably another good resource for new hunters or for experienced hunters to direct new hunters to. It may even also be a good resource for experienced hunters to watch and remember, like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for so long, I completely forgot about that part of it when I was learning. Because I guess a little bit of a tangent is I'm shocked sometimes at how little non-hunting public knows or understands about hunting. Like when I get to talking about the laws and the regulations and the bag limits and the seasons, like sometimes people are surprised to hear that. Like, oh, I had no clue. I just thought you just went out and shot one, or, it's like, no. You got to buy a tag and it's regulated, and it's like, so I guess where I'm going with that is I think it's good for experienced hunters to be talking about those things to non-hunters so that they don't, it's like an advocacy thing for hunting, in that non-hunting public votes. Right. And if they understand that, like, this is well regulated, this is safe, then they're more likely to be okay with it. Whereas if they think it's just a bunch of people out in the woods with guns shooting anything that moves,
right?
I mean, I could easily see how that could be off-putting to people.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, if people are of the mindset that we're just out there killing the animals, that's negative. But in reality, hunters do more good for the animals than bad.
Yeah.
Because it is so regulated, and the financial side of it, it's just, people just don't realize that there is a lot of rules and regulations in place, to the point where it's regulated to the point where hunters cannot cause a species to go extinct. It just can't happen. We cannot go out and shoot every white-tailed deer.
Right.
It's just impossible. We can't do it. There's regulations in place to prevent it. So and people just don't realize that, it's not just me going out and shooting a deer because my freezer's empty any time of the year I want. There's a season, there's a way to go about it. There's a lot of financial support that goes into the species.
Right. Licenses and tags, and it's all very well regulated, as hunters know. But I find that the non-hunting public, if their parents, their dad or their uncle or whatever didn't hunt, they may not have a clue. So it's good to be talking to people about that. So to get back to Hank Shaw and cooking, he's a professional chef that specializes in wild game. Like, that's his thing. And he's got a lot of great recipes. His website is honest-food.net, but probably the easiest way to find him is just search for Hunter, Angler, Gardener, Cook. That's kind of his online presence. He's got a couple books that are great cooking resources. They're all kind of funny. So his deer book or venison book is Buck Moose, Recipes and Techniques for Cooking Deer, Elk, Moose, Antelope, and Other Antlered Things. He's got other books, for waterfowl and stuff, called Duck, Goose. And his small game book is called Rabbit, Quail, Cottontail. So I really like his books because it's a cookbook, but it's not just a cookbook in the sense that it's, here's the recipe, here's the ingredients. Like, he talks a lot about I don't want to say the science, but like the why behind why you're cooking this meat this way, which then allows you to apply those techniques or those principles to recipes of your own creation, right? You kind of understand that, like, the meat, venison, for example, behaves this way because it's really lean when you cook it. And so if you keep these things in mind, no matter what you're cooking, it'll turn out good, sort of thing. And so he's got a lot of really good recipes. Like I said, he's got a section in his book on what he calls the wobbly bits. So I forget if I mentioned it, if I talked about it as the wobbly bits in the goals episode, but that's any of the non-traditional muscle cuts, right? It's heart, it's tongue, it's liver. What else does he have in there? I don't know, tripe, which I think is like that stomach lining. Yeah. So he's got tons and tons of great resources on cooking wild game, wild meats of all different kinds. And So I would definitely, if you're looking for good recipes, I would definitely recommend his books. Check them out online, that sort of thing, because it's a great resource from the food standpoint. So with that being said, do you guys have anything else we want to cover before we wrap it up today? Shaking heads?
No, nothing.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's tough because there's like so much.
There's so much.
But we want to try and keep it high level. You know, I mean, and I guess stay tuned in future episodes. We'll probably get into some of these topics a little more in detail. Like we had talked about in a future, future episode, possibly doing like, you've shot a deer, now what type episode. Yeah. There's just so much, but again, a lot of that's in the Steve Rinella book. If you really, I mean, it will walk you through processing the deer and all that, and how to field dress an animal. All that's in the Steve Rinella books, I know. But again, that comes back to kind of having a mentor, because there's a lot of tips and tricks and things that you learn just by doing it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of one of those things too that once you do it, they're all very similar.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, they're all mammals.
Yeah.
And mammals are, for the most part, constructed the same way.
Yeah.
So once you get in there, it's intimidating, but once you get in there and see what's in there, it's all familiar. It's the same stuff that we have inside of us.
Right.
So I just don't want
so I guess let us know if because we, like Jacob said, we kicked around the idea of maybe doing like a multi-part series on getting into hunting, where we can go into some more details on finding a place to hunt and either getting access to private land, or where are some good public land resources, and then once you're there, how do you find a spot to sit, and some basic tracking stuff. And we would do like a multi-part segment or series on that if that's something people are interested in. So let us know, send us a message online, Facebook, Instagram, wherever, if that's something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, and just as a final tip here, because we did kind of get in the weeds with some of the stuff, but as a new hunter, just go out in the woods or the field and have fun. It's supposed to be fun. So go have fun.
Right. I think a lot of people lose sight of that this is fun. This is supposed to be enjoyable.
Yeah.
That's what hooks every one of us from day one. If we went out the first time and hated it, we wouldn't be hunters.
Yeah.
We enjoy what we do. Don't let all the big bucks, so to speak, and the big buck craze, and I never see deer like that. Well, neither does 95% of the people that are hunting.
Yeah.
Just because one person on Facebook shot a 200-inch whitetail yesterday, he's one of two in the state. You know what I mean? Like that's not normal.
Yep.
So just remember, keep your head clear and expectations realistic. Enjoy yourself. That's what it's all about. Again, we're by no means professionals. We have the same struggles that everybody else has.
Yep. And hunting's a journey, right? I mean, you don't start off being an expert. You continue to learn, right? Try new things, and hey, that didn't work, so how can I tweak that so that it does work next time, or maybe I get a little closer next time, or whatever. It's a journey, so just enjoy the journey. I guess with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So like I mentioned, we'll have all the links in the show notes for everything we talked about today. Follow us on Facebook at Ohio Huntsman, and on Instagram at Ohio Huntsman Podcast. Subscribe to the show so you get notified when there's new shows. And we'd really appreciate it if you would give us a review on iTunes. That helps other people find the show and help get the word out, and tell your buddies about it. And with that, thanks for listening.